Okay, so we're ready to export our character out to Cinema 4D now, but before we do, it's probably not a bad idea to remove anything in our scene that we don't need. Firstly, if we zoom out here, her legs aren't going to be seen in our final render, which will just be this area here, so we can probably get rid of her shoes. So let's delete this stuff first by right-clicking and delete selected items. And don't worry about losing the camera. We'll recreate that as a redshift camera later on in Cinema 4D. Then we'll track down those shoes. So let's pop this open. And I think the shoes are this one, the heels. So we'll delete that as well. And now our character is barefoot. And I think that's ready to export. So we'll grab the root of the figure and we'll find our Daz to Cinema 4D plugin, which you will notice has moved in the latest version of Daz Studio from the scripts menu, which is now gone, over to File, Send to, and you can now find that here. So we'll click that, which brings up our export window. So let's go through these. Firstly, we have the asset type, and you can choose from skeletal mesh, static mesh, or animation. And I've actually tried just about every combination of these, and the only one that seems to work with pre-pose characters is actually animation, even though we don't actually have any animation in our scene. But for best results, I usually just go with this one. So let's select that. Then if you like, you can choose to export the morphs as well, which I usually don't bother with, but just for demonstration purposes, let's enable that and set up some morphs so you can see how this works. And we'll export morphs from our character only. So we'll collapse these up, except for our Babina 8 character, which will pop open. And I don't want to export all of the morphs because that'll take forever. So let's just do the head morphs. So all of these different facial expressions. So we can grab any one of these and hit Control A to select them all. Then we just need to add them for export. And we'll accept that. And we can also bake our subdivisions here if we want to, but I like to export the lowest level of subdivisions possible and smooth things out in Cinema 4D if I need to. So I don't bother with this one either. And finally, we've got the advanced settings, which let us fine tune the FBX export settings, which in this case, we don't need either. So let's go with this and hit accept, and it will start the export process here in Daz. And because we're exporting our morphs and some pretty high resolution geometry, especially in the hair, this is actually going to take quite a while, but I'll speed up the process so you don't need to sit and watch that. Okay, so that's done, and it actually took about 7 minutes to do on my laptop. So it's not exactly a quick process. However, if we weren't exporting hair or the morphs, it probably would have taken just a few seconds. Anyway, it's now telling us we need to head over to Cinema 4D to complete the import process. So let's hit OK and do that. And over here in the latest version of Cinema 4D, if we installed it correctly, we should be able to find the Daz to Cinema 4D plugin up here in the main menu. So let's fire that up. And all we need to do to complete the import is click on this Genesis Characters button right here, because we're trying to import a character as opposed to an environment or prop. So let's click that. And it does look like nothing's happening. And it actually seems like Cinema 4D has crashed. And if we take a look at the task manager, it even says that Cinema 4D is not responding, which is usually something that happens when it does crash. But this is a little bit misleading. It is actually calculating in the background, but it can take a really long time. Again, that's probably because we've got the hair in there as well as the morphs. So the best thing to do at this point is to go and grab a coffee and just let it do its thing. So I'll go and do that and we'll be back when it's done. Okay, and our import is finally done. It actually took about 20 minutes in the end, which is the most annoying thing about this plugin, especially when you're not quite sure if it's worked or not. But anyway, it's now asking if we'd like to fix the bone orientation, which can help if you're importing a character in an A pose. But if you've already posed your character in Daz, like we have, this is more likely to just break everything. So we'll say no to that, and we'll OK that. And it'll take another few seconds to finalize the import before finally asking if we'd like to save the textures as well, which is definitely a good idea. So let's do that. And we'll just make a folder called Portrait and save that. And you might occasionally get a warning like this about a missing texture. So you might need to find that within your Daz library folder in order to relink that up. So just take note of the missing file name and we'll open up our Daz library, which we looked at in an earlier video. Then we just need to do a quick search for the missing image, which is this guy here. And to find where that's hiding, we can right click and go to Open File Location. And if we now copy this directory, we can go back to Cinema 4D and relink this by hitting yes and pasting in the directory where the image is and just selecting it from here. And that should collect the image along with the other textures and save them to your project folder, which again will take a few more seconds. And now our character has finally been imported, bones and all. And we might just hide the skeletons so we can see the model a bit easier by setting the filter preset to animation, which hides all the rigging bits and pieces. And our character isn't looking too bad. And if we take a look up here, we've got our morphs and our character rig. And if we click on here, we can find all of those facial morphs we chose to export. So we could carry on tweaking the pose from here within Cinema 4D if we wanted to. Let's maybe make her a bit angrier, like so. Or give her a bit of a smile instead, which is a bit creepy. So you do have the added flexibility of tweaking your character outside of Daz, but exporting all of this stuff is definitely going to bloat up your scene and make things slower than it needs to be. So I definitely prefer to finalize my pose back in Daz before exporting, so you can keep your Cinema 4D scenes as streamlined as possible. But I thought I'd show you this anyway. We also have our bones and rig in here as well, which again isn't really needed unless we plan to repose our character. But one benefit might be if we grab the weighting tag here on our main character mesh, we could decrease the weight back to 0 and put that part of the character back to the original A pose, which might make editing your model a bit easier if you need to. But again, I'd also prefer to do that back in Daz. Another thing we can do is add an IK rig to our character by clicking this button. And yes. And again. And now we have a more traditional style of rig where we can grab these controllers and move the limbs around, which again doesn't work so well on already posed characters. So you're best using this option on A pose characters instead. However, the eye control here should work pretty well, like so. So the Daz to Cinema 4D plugin gives us some extra options when exporting our models, but it's definitely not perfect. And there is actually one really big problem when importing this way. If we hide the IK rig for a second and take a look at our character, especially down here, you'll notice that the arm and quite possibly her other joints are looking a bit weird. And if we go back to Daz for a second and frame up on that elbow, it looks like it bends very naturally here and the elbow is nice and sharp. But our imported model definitely doesn't look like that. And no matter what I tried, I wasn't able to find a way to import this correctly with the Daz to Cinema 4D bridge, at least not for the Genesis 8 characters I tested. But I did come up with a bit of a workaround if this does happen to you. So let's save this for now in case we need to come back to it, and we'll head back over to Daz Studio. So the best way to export a pre-posed character like this and keep all the limbs looking exactly like they should is a bit of a hack. And it's actually by converting our character into a static geometry mesh before we do the export, which means getting rid of all of the bones and the rig itself. So we could do that the way we looked at in the previous lesson, where we could grab an object and come over to Edit, Object, Rigging, and Convert Props to Figure, which is what we did with our bracelet before. But that would take quite a while to go through all the objects and might also lead to other issues when we try to convert the character itself. But what we can do instead is run a little script that can quickly convert everything into geometry for us. So if we head over to this page on the Daz 3D website, and I'll leave a link to this in the resources PDF, we just need to download this .dsa file down here, which will convert our figure to props and help keep the shape of our mesh when we go to export. So download that and we'll head back to Daz. And back here, we just need to make sure that we have our character selected. And I've just got our script off to the side here. And you can see I've just saved that in a script folder on my computer, but you can put it anywhere you like, because all you need to do to run this script is to just double click on it while you've got Daz Studio open. You can see that's just run inside Daz on our selected character. And we've now turned everything into mesh objects with that same icon we saw back in the last lesson. So with that extra step done, we can now select all of these objects and head back to our Daz to Cinema 4D bridge. And this time we need to go with static mesh instead, because we're not exporting the rig anymore, just the static mesh geometry. And we won't bother with the morphs this time, because now that we've converted our figure to a prop, there won't actually be any morphs. Plus, we're happy with all the posing we've done in Daz already, so we don't need to make any changes in Cinema 4D. So we'll leave that off, and we'll hit accept. And straight away, you'll notice that the export process was much quicker. Only a few seconds as opposed to 7 minutes. So let's hit OK and head back to Cinema 4D. Then in a fresh scene, let's finish the import. But this time, rather than importing a Genesis character, we need to use the environment and prop button because we've converted the figure to a prop. So let's click that. And this time, we didn't need to wait 20 minutes for the import to happen. That literally only took a few seconds. So let's save the textures again. Okay. And again, we need to relocate that missing image. So I'll quickly just link that up again. And now finally, if we zoom in, we can see that that arm is exactly how it should be. However, everything's not quite perfect. If we take a look up here, something strange has happened to our earrings now. So I'll take care of that in just a second. But I just want to show you the difference up here as well. If we take a look inside this null, you can see we no longer have any bones or parts of the rig. Just a group for each of our different objects. So just to keep everything nice and tidy and as simple as we can make it, let's take all the mesh objects out of these nulls. So let's right click in here and choose Unfold All so we can expose all the objects in here. Then we'll click up here on Filter and Filter by Objects and just hide the null objects for now. So now we can easily select all of the geometry without the nulls getting in the way. And we'll hit Control X to cut those. Then bring back the nulls and Control V to paste the objects back into our scene outside of the nulls. And we can then hide the filters and grab the nulls that we no longer need and just delete them, leaving us with just the mesh objects. So now that this is nice and tidy, let's look at fixing those earrings. And I'm not exactly sure why these didn't import correctly, but I do tend to find this happens with non-Daz products. So anything bought from the external stores, like Renderosity for example. But if something like this does happen to you, it is fairly easy to fix. I'd suggest just trying to export the earrings again by themselves, maybe even as an OBJ export. Or what we'll do here is just grab them from our previous export. And you can see they seem to have worked fine in here. So let's grab one of these. And you can see they're in here somewhere. So if we just go to View and scroll to Selection, that takes us straight to the earrings. So we'll grab both of them. And actually, let's also delete the materials on there. Then we'll grab both again and hit Control C to copy them. Then we can head back to our new scene and just paste them into here. And you can see those are in the correct position now. So all we need to do is move the materials from these ones onto these. So I'll grab the bad ones, which are down here, and move them to the top. And we'll move the material from the bad left earring to the new one. And the same for the right earring. And those look good now. So we don't need these anymore. So we'll grab those and delete them. And now we finally have our character correctly imported. So we'll save that and get things ready for Redshift in the next lesson.